Today on At Your Service, we will discuss the very tough topic of human trafficking, a show you certainly do not want to miss.
Hello, today on At Your Service, we will be discussing the tough topic of human trafficking. And we have with us Ms. Sarah Kivett. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
So I have been with Anne Arundel County Public Schools for about 9 years now. Prior to that, I was a Baltimore City police officer for about 9 years.
Thank you, Sarah.
So that's what made you get involved in this human trafficking, our topic today?
No, actually, when I first got hired, I was the board investigator. And in that role, I worked very closely with Child Protective Services and sort of became a liaison between Anne Arundel County Public Schools and Child Protective Services.
Oh, okay. So what is human trafficking?
So human trafficking can be broken down into two parts. It is labor and sex driven. So human trafficking is basically when somebody exchanges sex or work for something of value or need. If you're over the age of 18, there has to be a force component. If you're under the age of 18, no force has to be applied.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so when we talk about minor sex trafficking, basically the difference is one's the labor for the human trafficking, just work, so they're forcing people to work, and then the sexual trafficking is just the sex component. So there's that difference. Do you find that people kind of lump words and terms together, the common understanding for trafficking in and of itself?
Yeah, I think when trafficking is brought up, I don't really think that the labor trafficking is really thought about as much. I think people tend to think more about the sex trafficking, and then I think people mistakenly think that adults are treated like minors, and they aren't. One for the force, and then the other is the prostitution factor. A child under the age of 18 cannot be a prostitute. It's trafficking, period. Okay. And that's a huge difference. So there's the force, and then there's the regulations of what can or cannot be considered prostitution.
Because they're minors, and it is typically a forced situation.
If you're a minor, no force has to be applied.
Okay.
It's just simply the exchange of something of need for sex, exploitation, a sexual act.
So if you could explain what domestic minor sex trafficking is.
So domestic minor sex trafficking is just domestic, meaning that it's in the United States, right? Because we think about it, it could be a global issue. It could be in Europe, it could be anywhere else, but really we're talking about domestic minor. So we're talking about domestic as in the US, we're talking about minor as in under the age of 18, and then we're talking about sex trafficking, again, which is when a child exchanges something of need or value, and it doesn't have to be money. It can be food, it can be clothing, it can be shelter for a sex act, which is also included exploitation, photographing, pornography, it's all included in that.
Yeah.
So what do you find, like what are some of your findings? Because I know you work closely with CPS, the Child Protective Service. What are you finding in these minor sexual trafficking cases that students or that children are being exploited? Typically, if it's not for money, it's for survival.
Often somebody who is looking to exploit a child will find a child who needs something, right? So maybe it's a child that has run away from home. That's a perfect victim. That's actually one of the targets. A child who's a product of the foster system that doesn't necessarily have a home and they need something. And so that is their perfect victim. That's target number one for them.
Okay.
So they'll find a child and say, what do you need? And I will exchange a sex act for your desire. So maybe it is clothing, maybe it's food.
You know, we're talking about domestic, and you mentioned domestic. How prevalent is this across the world, globally and nationally?
They estimate that approximately 100 to 300,000 children are exploited yearly.
That's a huge.
Globally, yes.
Now, is that with sex trafficking?
Yes, that's sex trafficking globally.
That's crazy.
How prevalent is it actually here in Maryland then? I know you gave us some numbers, but
So
in this particular area even.
Correct. So in 2014, there were 396 survivors in Maryland in 2014. Of those, 124 were children. Having said that, 175 did not identify their ages. So that's grappling. I spoke to Child Protective Services just this morning, and this year they have investigated 13 cases. That doesn't mean that it was reported, just cases they deemed met the criteria for a complete investigation, just in Anne Arundel County.
Okay, just particular sitting in our county.
just on our own county.
So one of the things that you had mentioned when you sent us some of the basic fact sheet was that Maryland is a gold mine. Explain to the viewers, the parents out there, in Anne Arundel County, and I know in some other counties that they view this program, why is Maryland a gold mine in the area of trafficking?
So human trafficking is often found in major corridors. We have 95 that runs right through Maryland. That allows for truckers to come through. 70% of human trafficking cases are at truck stops. Think about how many truck stops we have along 70, for example. When the truckers stop, there's trafficking. Think about our casinos. Think about our sporting events. Think about our ports. Think about how accessible we are to New York, Philadelphia, DC. I mean, we are in such a great spot that we're almost a major thoroughfare for trafficking.
Wow.
So when you say some of these places like truck stops, what is it about a truck stop? I mean, I know that it's along the corridor, but are the people that are kidnapping these children taking them to these places?
So you say kidnapping. They're not necessarily kidnapped, right? A lot of times they are bribed. Sometimes they're tortured. Sometimes they are coerced. And they are taking the truck stops because typically at a truck stop, what do you have? You have men in trucks. Men in trucks who often will pay for sex. And sometimes they realize they're paying for sex with minors, and sometimes they don't ask the age. Sometimes they probably just don't care.
Right.
And so what they do is the person who has control of this child will take the child to where they think they can make the most profit. And to understand this, you really have to understand that sex trafficking is the second largest industry, organized crime industry in the world. Only second to drugs. And the reason is, correct, it's amazing. And the reason is because you can sell sex over and over and over again. You can sell one child 6, 7, 8 times a night. You can take one drug and use it one time, and it's used product.
Right.
But the child you can sell over and over and over. I believe human trafficking, sex trafficking, is only tied with illegal handguns.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, that's amazing to me, and it's frightening. You know, because I think that people, when I talked to somebody in my family about it, and they were like, "What are you talking about?" You know, and I was like, that it exists in the state of Maryland, and it's prevalent at certain areas. And you know, when I sit there and I'm at the light sometimes, and I see these kids standing at the corner, typically they're begging for money. But then I also wonder, is this person being coerced? Are they a victim of labor trafficking itself on the corner? Is that common when you come across and you're sitting in your car and they're pretty young? Could you pretty much say there's a good chance that these kids are the kids we're speaking about?
It could be. I question that too. When you roll up to a stop sign, and you see a child, like how old are you? Or if you come in at a casino, how old are you?
Right.
Or the kid that's going into the liquor store, how old are you really, and why are you here? I don't know if it's common or if it's something to be on the lookout for.
Right.
The child is in a spot that maybe they shouldn't be in. The child who comes in and out of a hotel 7 times a night and looks like they're 13 with different guys, the odds are they're not there because they want to be. That is a key indicator of trafficking.
So what are some other things that gives you clues or signs that a child might be, just
So-
in general?
Right, so to bring it down to local, because really it could be, I tell you that the child that they're looking for is the child that is a runaway, or is the child that is doesn't have a home. But in the absence of that child, they'll take any one of our children. That's why it's so alarming. And so I actually went to a training one time where they sat at a prison and they interviewed a convict. And they said, you know, how did you do it? What did you do? And he said, I went to the schoolyard and I waited for that one kid that didn't meet a friend after school, for that one kid that didn't have parents come pick them up. And I watched them and I learned the behavior, and then I befriended that one kid. And I said to myself, I'm going to make that kid my friend. So what do? They buy them the fancy jewelry. They buy them the nice shoes. They befriend them. And then at the end of it, since we're friends, now I'm your boyfriend. I bought your boyfriend. So it's a child that has the much older boyfriend that no one ever gets a chance to meet. All of a sudden they have nice new gear, new clothing, new outfits that maybe their family financially could not afford otherwise, and they start popping up with them. And then they have a boyfriend that they can't tell anybody about, and they can't show them their boyfriend. And it's a new boyfriend, and they can't share them, right? And then Well, if you love me, you'll have sex with me and 6 of my friends. And then you start talking about injury, and then you start talking about what happens to the child. Are they coming to school? Are they excessively tired? Do they have marks on their body? Are they talking about different men? Are they all of a sudden drawn in? Those are all key indicators that, at least if nothing else, it's a reason to start asking questions.
Yeah, for sure. What would you say is the average age of a victim?
So the average age is 12 to 14. There are outliers. The youngest victim in Maryland was 5. And it's not to say they can't be younger, 9, 10, 11, 12. I mean, those are all very applicable ages to find somebody. The average life expectancy for a child who is inducted into this life is 7 years. So you have 7 years to save a life, statistics show, because they are basically tortured, drugged, raped, beaten. And there's only so much a little body can take, and statistics show that 7 years is about it.
Wow.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
So what are some important things? I know you mentioned a little bit about, products like brand new clothes. If I was a parent watching this show, what would you want me to know? Why is it important that I know this, not just only this information, which I think it has value in and of itself, but what are some other huge signs? And the other thing that I want people to look at is, you mentioned something about if you see a 7-year or a 10-year-old coming in and out of a hotel, not just parents, but employment, people in the community, in the schoolhouse. What should teachers be on the lookout for? Bus drivers, playground workers, just some basic guidance for people.
So we have to start asking questions. Who are your kids communicating with? You should know, who are they communicating with? Where are they going? And I would even extend that to your kids' friends, because you should know who your kids are hanging out with, right? Start asking questions. As a bus driver, if you see a kid and a random person picks them up, there's no harm in telling somebody that, hey, I don't think this is right. Something just looked different. The kid goes home every day with parent A, and now this man is showing up who doesn't look like a parent to me. You have to start asking questions. You have to start looking for indicators of withdrawn from society, no longer wants to be around their friends, because seclusion is a #1 way, right? They want to get you, and they want to get you themselves, because the less people that know, the better they are to get you away from your family. And so watch out for the kids that are all of a sudden don't want to be around their friends anymore, aren't bringing them home. And the most important part is just ask questions. You have to ask your kid questions. Where are you going? Who are you going with? Monitor their internet usage, entirely monitor it. Who are they friending? Because social media is such a tool to meet these people online, and you think you're communicating with a 10-year-old, and in fact you're communicating with a 42-year-old. Male or female, it knows no gender bias.
Yeah.
That's a little scary.
Yeah, it sure is. Jeez. I know that they have different types of technology out there where you can monitor your children's internet. Are you aware of any?
So I don't use it with my own children, but I am aware that you can monitor. There are apps you can install on your phone that will allow, if a message is sent to your child, it will duplicate a message to you. That's one example. I personally recommend that all parents keep passwords, require access to your child's cell phone. That's a good way to monitor it, to just simply say, I reserve the right to check on you. It's for safety. Not because I don't trust you, but because I'm protecting you.
You can never be too safe
No.
when you're talking about this serious of an
Because
issue.
it's really amazing how many people are just, you think you're playing a Nintendo game with a 12-year-old peer, and it's really not who you think they are. And I really feel like they do that consciously and purposefully to victimize their students.
This is a powerful topic, and we're going to go to a short break, and then we'll be right back.
Welcome back to At Your Service. Sarah, we just viewed a very powerful video. Can you shed some light a little bit about this video clip that the viewers just watched?
So it was just a video of a Anne Arundel County Public School student, or at least an Anne Arundel County student, that was in the human trafficking world as a victim. And I think it has an impact of a story of a very local student, or a child at the very least, who was caught in the sex trafficking ring and was saved by one compassionate person who thought enough to ask and help her. And so I think it's a negative story with a positive ending. There's not a whole lot of them, but it is really good to see one, and it's local, so we get to feel that, wow, this happens, and it happens in our county.
Well, before we go on with the questions, do you feel like there's a lot of not just misunderstanding, but misinterpretation about human trafficking? Like somewhere there's that blame piece, like they wouldn't be there if they, they could just leave at any time. I hear that quite a bit from really, a variety of the community and population, that they feel like there's some victim responsibility.
Correct, like blame the victim?
Yes,
Correct.
exactly.
So there is this stereotype that the victim can leave whenever they want. But what they forget is sometimes these victims have nowhere to go. And then sometimes it messes with their heads so much that there is a blurred line between, does this person who is selling me love me? Because these are babies, these kids who really can't understand the concept of a healthy, normal relationship, and their perspective has already been skewed, so they're not really even sure what they're in the middle of. And then there are the kids that are kept there through force or coercion, and that is simply, you're mine, I've been here for a year. Imagine what your dad would think if he knew you were turning these tricks, or what would your mom say, or what would your pastor say, or what would your teacher say, because the minute you leave me, I'm going to tell them, or even worse, I'm going to hurt somebody, maybe a little sister, maybe a sibling, maybe a mom or a dad, and so they feel compelled to stay. They feel like there is no way to leave.
That's awful.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It is. I know sometimes teachers will see something that might come out in somebody's writing, a student's writing, or any type of situation like that, or listening to this program. What really can they do at this point to help the child if they suspect, like?
So teachers are mandatory reporters.
Okay.
So they don't really have an option in this case. Per COMAR, they have an obligation to report to Child Protective Services, CPS. Through Anne Arundel County Public Schools, we have an electronic form. You basically go through the Student Services section, go to Mandatory Abuse and Neglect Reporting, complete the form, and hit submit. Once you hit submit, or actually just prior to hitting submit, you're going to call Child Protective Services at 410-421-8400 and make your verbal report. And so in that, several years ago, human trafficking was made part of the mandatory reporting requirement.
If they're not a teacher, and they could be a cafeteria worker, a bus driver, the playground worker, would they follow? Are they still obligated?
Yes. All Anne Arundel County Public Schools, volunteers and employees must report to Child Protective Services per mandatory reporting laws.
Even if it's not a student that they suspect in the school, supposedly they're at Walmart and they see something that's really shady. How would they go about that? Is it different?
Same mechanism. We actually made the online form to make it easy for you. And so it used to be you had to mail paper copies and file things in different offices. Now all you have to do is hit submit. Once you hit submit, the electronic form goes to Child Protective Services, it goes to the State's Attorney's Office, and it comes to my office. It's really simple.
That's great. It's great to know.
Yes, you'd mentioned that things happened here in Anne Arundel County. Do you have any personal experience of some stories that you've had that might help our viewers?
So not really so much in the county, but I will turn the viewers' attention to local news. I encourage people to Google it. Ocean City has had several in the last 2 or 3 years of sex trafficking rings, where 5 or 6 or 7 people have been arrested for trafficking people in Ocean City. There was one in Laurel. There has been one in Glen Burnie. There has been one locally in Baltimore City. And these are all within the last year or two. There have been several cases. It's not just male, and it's not just female. It's not a race. You can blame it on no one particular class, but they are local. They're local to our county as well as to our state.
Wow. So it was a few months back, there were girls being they were trying to abduct girls out of DC, PG County. Was this that whole piece that you were seeing all over social media, that they were leaving malls and people are trying to abduct them. Is this part of what we're seeing, that people are becoming more brazen in trying to get a human product?
I think people are becoming more brazen, but I think we're also becoming a little more vocal about it. And so we're spreading the word, and we're on social media, and so we're talking about it, right? We're seeing things and we're talking about it. And so things that maybe we wouldn't see 10 years ago, now we're seeing it because we're sharing everything, right? We're sharing it on Facebook, we're sharing it on Twitter. So we're seeing a lot of movement. So I think that's all positive movement. We're identifying and we're telling everybody be on the lookout. Because like I said, it doesn't have to be that runaway kid. It's your kid that you leave in the mall. And one of the suspects that we had the pleasure of watching his interview said that he would go to the mall and he would watch and see which girl is just looking down and maybe falling back in the crowd, lacks confidence, and he pays her a compliment. And he pays her another compliment and she starts to glow. And then he's her boyfriend. And then he's in, right? And so they wait and they wait for that one kid, and it doesn't have to be the kid that is abused at home. It doesn't have to be the kid that is neglected at home. It's the kid that just needs a little bit more, and they try to fill that void, and then they take advantage of it.
Wow.
It's powerful.
That is powerful.
Again, it's that monitoring piece too. Like if you have your children and they're going to the mall, they want to go here and there, or sporting events, just know who they're going to be with, and then ask them questions when they come back, or even during it.
Right.
How's it going? Are you having a good time?
Correct.
Right. So, safety-wise, when you some parents might take this and be like, "You're never leaving the house," but you have one extreme to the next. But
I have
what
kids.
is-
I've thought about it.
Right. So, what would be a good common practice? I know we've talked a little bit about it. Definitely not dropping your kids off at the mall, and just hours upon hours, because you don't know what's happening. But kids like to go to the mall. We like to shop. We like to buy video games and things like that. So, what are some things that you would suggest when you are out in public? You're out at sporting events, because sports are huge, as we know. Families, kids go to sporting events. Parents will drop them off at age 13.
Correct.
At the movie theaters and whatnot. So what's some guidance that you could give us?
So I think part of it is, I hate to go back to the don't talk to strangers routine, but we kind of have to get back to the basics, right?
Yeah.
If you don't know someone, they're not necessarily your friend. Like random people that approach you on the street and say, hey, you want to hang out? That's not okay. So we kind of have to get back to that. We also have to be accountable as adults and as parents for monitoring our children, right? Know where they are, know when they're going to come back, have check-in times, have a safety name, have a safety word, whatever it is. If you're in trouble, let me know where you are. Monitoring their online activity is super important. Knowing their friends, knowing who they're friending on social media. That is challenging, right? Because your kids probably have hundreds of kids that are friends on social media. How many of them do they really know? I mean, that's kind of a scary thought as I sit here. And really just being accountable and being present as a parent.
I think that's really important. I think the other piece is definitely knowing your child's personality. I really truly feel like it really comes into play, and know if you have a sensitive child or somebody, or a child that is not quite as confident. I think that personality plays into it. I'm not sure how.
Yeah, you just have to be more in tune to them, I think, and
I
really know
do.
what's going on.
Definitely.
Correct. A lot of it is just the asking questions. There was a interview of a young girl in one of our school settings who said that she was in school 5 days a week, and she went to some kind of a religious service every Wednesday, and she said not one person asked her what was wrong. She said she came to school with bruises, and not one person said, what's wrong with you? And she said because no one asked, she thought no one cared, and so she didn't tell. And she was having sex with 10 to 12 guys a week. She said not one hotel staff said, why are you in here again? They all just waved her up to the room. And so the bottom line was no one asked her, and so she thought no one cares. And she continued until someone stepped up to the plate and asked her what was wrong. And she actually is a survivor and is out. I think she's about 22 years old now.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I guess people are scared to get involved. Like they think that if they report anything, if it's not true, then it might come back on them. We know that that's not true.
Correct.
So I think that's a big part of it.
I think some of it is, and I think the nice thing is if you do call CPS, they will take your report and they will do their investigation without getting too much information from you, especially if
And
you're out on this, you're in the mall and something's not right.
You can be anonymous. You can make an anonymous report.
Well, I've learned so much about this topic today, and it really is interesting when you look at the state and where we're located, and that the impact that that we can have and we can help save some children, because that whole 7-year life expectancy that you mentioned earlier is,
Shocking.
it's mind-blowing to me. So we really, it's kind of like an urgent situation that we have going on here. So I think anytime that we can share this information, just any last little pieces of information or next steps, you know, that we can share with parents or the audience.
No, I would just tell people that if they are interested in knowing more about human trafficking, they could look up the National Human Trafficking Resource Center.
Okay.
They provide statistics, they provide information. There is a hotline, there are videos, there are tutorials on what to look for, and then also Child Protective Services can also provide information if you're in need of more info.
Sarah, I just want to thank you very much for shedding this light on this huge situation that's happening across not only the state of Maryland, but like nationally and globally. So thank you very much for this information and spending some time with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining. At your service. See you next time.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Porter. Anne Arundel County Public Schools Department of Transportation is raising the level of awareness for the safety of your children as we transport them to and from school. When a school bus stops to load students, as a driver, this is what you will see. At 150 feet, the bus will activate hazard lights. At 100 feet, the bus driver will activate the amber lights. They will start slowing down. At 10 feet before the bus stops, they will turn on the red bus lights. Their stop sign will come out, and students will begin to load. Once all students are on board safely, the bus driver will turn off red lights and move forward. At this time, it is safe for the motorist to resume movement.